I'm officially obsessed, and you will be too. If you haven't tried Lem by Hello Nancy yet, what are you doing? Over 1 million women are using it, and the reviews are wild. One girl literally said, "Join the incredibly satisfied brigade." I didn't believe it until I tried it myself. The hype is 100% real. Don't let the cute design fool you. Go to hellonancy.com and see what the hype is about.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to have back on the podcast a friend of the podcast, I would say, Pamela Hutchinson.
Hello, John. It's lovely to be here.
Pamela is a writer for Sight and Sound. She has her own column there, and she's written several books in the past, including I think you've got a couple of books in the BFI Classics. You've got one on Louise
The Red
Brooks.
Shoes and Pandora's Box.
Pandora's Box, yes, both wonderful. And this book that you've just written, just been published, The Curse of Queen Kelly, is an amazing story. It's a history that I only knew through talking to you, to tell you the truth. Okay. And it's kind of the first sort of Heaven's Gate style disaster.
Yeah. This is like an absolute classic sort of industry bone-chilling story of when a film goes wrong, and yet there's not that obvious happy ending because the film was never finished. So they sack the director just a few weeks into the shoot, and they never really finish the film. So there never is, but then the film was released and it did well, or the film was released and then 40 years later people acclaimed it as a masterpiece, like Pandora's Box, for example, or the way people talk about Heaven's Gate now, very different to the way they talked about it when it came out and sank the studio. So it seemed to kill quite a few people's careers. It was not a fun experience, and yet the woman who had the most to lose from being associated with the film, the star Gloria Swanson, she kept this thing hanging around her neck for the rest of her very long life. So the book is about how these three bizarre people came together and made this film. Gloria Swanson, Joseph P. Kennedy, the financier and political founder figure of the Kennedy clan, and also Erich von Stroheim, like just your absolute ideal auteur of the silent era. And then it's also about how the film went wrong and what happened afterwards, how they spent decades trying to fix it, and how Gloria Swanson wouldn't be Gloria Swanson without what she called the curse of Queen Kelly hanging around her neck.
And this is such an exciting and interesting tale because it also sort of teaches you a lot about the period and about the film industry, because it's taking place right on the cusp of the introduction of sound. In fact, some sound films are already being made, and there's a talk of making Queen Kelly as a sound film or even a musical, which reminds me of Singing in the Rain. You know?
Yeah. It is, and a musical, and then, oh no, a musical isn't enough. It has to be a really refined operetta in the kind of, Viennese style. So then we have two versions of it as a musical, neither of which get made partly because of the abysmal way that Kennedy treats people. Like, that's one thing, hiring a really renowned composer and then treating them like, the hired help. But yeah, the coming of sound is really interesting because Erich von Stroheim, classy individual that he was, whenever anyone asked him about Queen Kelly, he just said, well, sound came in and we abandoned it. Sound came in and Kennedy wanted a sound film rather than a silent film. Very sophisticated of him to be just, tight-lipped on it. But it's a complete lie. They knew the film was going to be made in a sound version. They were shooting it silent to add sound sequences in. And the film's the film came to being well after, Al Jolson in the Jazz Singer. Sound was in full flow when they were making this. Important film studios in Hollywood were already working on their sound movies. So sound didn't come as a shock in the middle of production, but it has been Erich von Stroheim's way of distancing himself from telling the full story of what really did stop it and what really got him the sack, which was possibly something a little bit more controversial than a microphone.
These are three characters who are just incredible personalities. And I was reading your book and I was just thinking, this is a film.
Yes. Oh, well, I hope so. If anyone would like to buy the rights, I mean, it's interesting.
Come on, Netflix. Come on.
Well, I mean, this is quite interesting. So obviously there have been many films made about the Kennedy family, and there've been books about there's been a book about the relationship between Gloria and Joe, and a book about Joe in Hollywood. So there's that too. But Netflix is putting together a serial about the Kennedys with Michael Fassbender playing Joseph P. Kennedy, and they claim that this series starts in the 30s. But they have cast Imogen Poots actually as Gloria Swanson. So I do wonder, I mean, I would love to say that they'd bought the rights to my book, but I do wonder whether we're going to have a little bit of Queen Kelly on Netflix. Or even, I mean, maybe Gloria Swanson just turns up at a party at some point. But I'm intrigued to see whether the Queen Kelly saga will get told on Netflix, and whether I think it's accurate, of course, which is the tedious thing to say when you're watching a glossy Netflix drama.
You've got to have that Radio 4 guest spot so that you can give them the knowledge.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I could get an article for one of the broadsheets out of that. Yeah. I mean, I think that people have told a version of the Queen Kelly story several times. Erich von Stroheim's line is that sound came in. Gloria Swanson's line is that Erich von Stroheim was deviating from the script. That's also objectively not accurate, not entirely true. So people have told this story, but what we really wanted to do with the archive, that materials that we had, and I think Milestone, who restored the film, had and shared with me, see whether there was more to be found out, see whether you could get at the truth. And I can't say conclusively exactly what happened, but I definitely uncovered a few more things that happened on that shoot than had been discussed before.
Yeah, everybody was sort of telling their own legends by the end of it. They were all constructing their own versions. But before we go any further, could we have like it's difficult to say a synopsis because the film actually develops as it goes through the process of being made, and even beforehand there are several drafts of the script, and then further on there are several drafts of the version of the film that they might try to rescue. But what's the general synopsis that we can give the listeners so they understand what we're talking about?
Okay, so Queen Kelly is a nickname given to a woman who is an American woman, a white woman running a brothel, a dive that's clearly a brothel in Tanzania. And that was the essence of the first story. And then she was going to meet this terrible plantation owner who she would be forced to marry. And then she would also meet this lovely German prince. And they expanded this. So instead of her meeting the prince there, this is her backstory. This is the man she fell in love with as a young girl. So the story of Queen Kelly, as they shot it, begins in a sort of fictionalized Middle European Germany. And Gloria Swanson plays a convent girl who meets and falls instantly in love with a debauched prince. Said debauched prince, played by Walter Byron, the English actor, is engaged to a mad queen. Mad, absolutely frothing at the mouth mad. And so when they have this one romantic night together, the mad queen discovers them and chases young Kelly, Patricia Kelly, the convent girl, out of the palace. And that's when she reaches a crisis in her life, which involves her being sent basically to Africa, which is where she meets her aunt who runs said establishment, in this dive, this sort of disgusting part of town. And so that's sort of about as much of the film that got made. She gets married when she gets to the brothel, let's just call it what it is, to the plantation owner played by Marshall Tully. And it's not a pleasant story, but it's Erich von Stroheim, so it's kind of gorgeous at all times.
We'll go back in a second and have a look at Erich von Stroheim, but the initial idea as well. I think it was you mentioned that it was called the Swamp originally, and there was a whole sequence where they were going to be in the swamp, and there were going to be alligators and crocodiles. Well, Africa, I guess it would be crocodiles rather than alligators, and a chase scene and lights coming towards them, and all this sort of palaver, and that none of that actually sort of ended up being shot or anything.
No, the Swamp was the name both of this GBS establishment and the physical location. And there had been like a few plays and films set in very seedy African settings, this very kind of white colonialist idea of what Africa would be, obviously, that Erich von Stroheim was clearly inspired by. And he wanted all this filth and action and sexual degradation and drunkenness, and also this amazing stunt sequence where you have to escape across the swamp, and there's a bit where they're tied to a tree. There's various ways that the plantation owner tries to murder the lovers, and both involve them being tied to a tree, and either the water will rise, but if the water rises, the crocodiles will also rise with them. And this was going to be Erich von Stroheim's massive set piece. He was just absolutely thrilled to shoot this. He was so excited, but he never got that far. In fact, before he got to that point, he was told to get rid of the tree. They said it was they couldn't afford it. So he got to the point where he knows he's got to finish the film, but without the exciting scene that is the one he really wanted to make.
Which is kind of his reason for making the film in the first place. Yeah. Let's go back then and talk about the identity of these three people. People listening to this will probably know Gloria Swanson. They probably know something about the director as well. But let's just go back a little bit further and let's start with Erich von Stroheim, who, of course, von is the nickname he was given by everyone, even though that's probably the least true of his names.
Erich von Stroheim was a provocateur. He was an auteur, he was a genius, but he was a real provocateur. So he gets off the boat in America and he decides that he's now a titled man. Erich von Stroheim with a string of other middle names. It's all a lie. He's no longer going to tell people he's Jewish. He's going to tell people he had this amazing military service and he went to university. And he's posing as his idea of a fine Austrian aristocrat. When you get to Germany, a lot of people don't know the difference between Austria and Germany. So if he has to pretend to be German, or people assume he's German, he sort of takes advantage of that. So he's the kind of guy that he's working in the movie industry during the First World War in America, and he's still trying to kid people on that he's a German spy, which seems to be the worst way to make friends. He's playing all these Hun villains in films, but he wanders around in his uniform and says vile things to people and sort of threatens to blow up munitions dumps and all kinds of crazy talk. So when he starts making films, he makes his first movie, Blind Husbands, and it's all him, starred by him, starring him, written, directed, and it wows everyone. People immediately notice that this guy's a genius and brilliant, egotistical, maybe villainous on screen, whatever, but brilliant. He keeps making movies in Hollywood and he keeps getting them taken off him. He's either sacked or he gets taken off the final cut, and they're cutting his films in front of his face, just destroying them, cutting them down and down and down. So his reputation gets really complicated. From pretending to be this political villain, he becomes either, the Hollywood trades, they'll talk about him as both, filmland's greatest luxury, because if you've got lots of money, you can make a von Stroheim film and it'll be beautiful. But also he's this kind of villain. Who is this guy who wastes producers' money, who baits the censors, who makes films that are immoral, possibly even casting American values into the mire? So he becomes a kind of industry villain, and as one of his great biographies of him puts it, the Hollywood scapegoat. I mean, he's a dangerous man to hire at this point. In 1927, 1928, if you decide to hire Erich von Stroheim, you might as well start playing with fire in the nitrate vault, really.
I'm just wondering, why anyone would then? I mean, yes, you're right. Tell us a little bit about what makes his films beautiful. I mean, Greed is the film, again, taken out of his hands and doesn't really survive in its full glory, but that's the sort of nailed on classic that is still promoted today. What is it about his movies which were so spectacular and so valued?
So predominantly when you're talking about greed, he had his meticulous attention to detail there comes out in what you call like unflinching realism, psychological realism. He drew these performances out of his cast, sometimes in very unpleasant ways, and a ridiculous attention to detail. And a sort of he's unafraid to show the unpleasant sides of humanity, the vile, degrading, violent, venal, cowardly sides of human nature. So that's what you see in Greed. You also see that in all of his other films, but he also in his other films, and it's there in Greed, but it's maybe not so obvious. He's really interested in beauty. He's really interested in kind of extreme beauty, a sensual world where everything is real. Famously, in his quest for realism, he would demand silk underwear for the extras, real champagne on the tables, and in the bottles, and real lobster and foie gras everywhere. Everything had to be real, every little detail that you couldn't possibly think of. And, greed was his way of transferring that attention to detail to showing the sordid underbelly of life with these people torn apart by avarice. And then people reacted so badly to it, said it was, something of the sewer. He said, well, I've given you dead cats and sewers. In my next film, I'm going to give you romance and apple blossom and so more than you can stand. And really, the next film he makes, The Wedding March, it has vile people behaving in unpleasant ways, but really it's almost overwhelmingly beautiful. There is blossom and detailed architecture and gorgeous uniforms and horses and dresses at every shot, and it overwhelms you with the romance that he's trying to create. The interesting thing about Queen Kelly, if it had been made, is it would be balanced between both Erich von Stroheim modes. It has basically the Merry Widow and Greed sort of glued together, and because he was never afraid to show what he considered was the truth about the world, which often, if you think about his experiences in life, it meant some of the terrible ways people treat each other, and certainly a certain amount of poverty and people who are oppressed in various ways, economically, socially, racially. Imagine him. I mean, the scene that doesn't survive, which we're pretty sure he shot, or some of the scenes that don't survive from Queen Kelly that we're pretty sure he shot, are the comings and goings in the brothel, and as explicit as you can be while staying in the corridor, shall we say, And at one point it does move into a bedroom, and that's the scene that I really think tore the whole thing in half.
And the thing is, Von has this reputation, but then again, Joseph Kennedy and Gloria Swanson are also to some degree giants, so they feel we want the best and he's the best, and also we are big enough that we can stand up to this guy. We're gonna rein him in, and he's going to give us a beautiful movie, and he's going to behave. Let's talk a little bit about Joseph Kennedy, and we'll come to Gloria. We'll give Gloria the sort of like the star treatment where she can arrive at the party as the last diva.
Yeah. So Joseph Kennedy, born in middle class, respectable lace curtain Irish Boston. His father ran a pub and was like a big political mover and shaker. He went to the good schools. He went to Harvard. He always felt like the kind of barkeeper's son from Boston. He felt a bit excluded. He wasn't the smartest. When he starts working in finance, he marries Rose Fitzgerald, who is the daughter of the former Boston mayor. And he sets about creating a political dynasty. He is convinced, Joseph P. Kennedy, that his son is going to be president of the United States. And everything he does, it doesn't really matter how he achieves it, he's going to set up that financial comfort zone for his children so they don't need to worry about money, and also move them into a more respectable sphere. I mean, respectable enough by most people's standards would be his background. But, he wants to be a millionaire. He wants to have the house in Palm Beach, and he wants to have the big, big house in New York. And he wants to, once he gets into finance, Wall Street, but he likes the theatre. And he sees the movies as a way to capitalize on his love for entertainment, that you can actually make money in this new industry. So when he enters movies, he goes in with this financier's instinct, which is to say, what's the least I can spend to get the most return? And, he'll be making movies really cheaply, but spending more on the marketing, all that kind of thing. And it's when Gloria Swanson meets him, sort of goes by her own volition to meet him, that he realizes that with a really big star like Gloria Swanson, he could make even more money. And this could be his one chance before he gets out of the movies to make a prestige picture. So he can be not just the guy who entered the movie business and made money, but who did the thing, made the movie, proved that he sort of won that game and could make a masterpiece.
Absolutely, and he and have his name in lights. That Hollywood will seduce you in the end, no matter how hard-nosed a businessman you think you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, it looks like he loses his head when he goes to Hollywood because, he ends up falling in love with Gloria Swanson, this big movie star, and he wants to put all his money into this wild endeavor of making a film with the most, audacious of directors, the one that no other studio has been able to tame. But when it comes down to it, Joseph Kennedy does regain his head and very much is the hard-nosed businessman all the way through the production of Queen Kelly. And with the moment that he pulls the plug, he really does pull the plug.
Yeah, and there's a brilliant example you put that he buys a bungalow for Gloria Swanson, and she's sort of like, oh, that's such a lovely gesture, so generous, and all the rest of it. And then she finds out that the bungalow's been charged to her own company, and he's basically not spent a dime of his own money.
Yeah, Joseph P. Kennedy came into Hollywood, ran at one point he was running like 5 studios at once, small ones. He made lots of money, but he never put a cent of his own cash into anything, and he hardly ever put his hardly ever put his studio's cash into things when he could avoid it. And so with Queen Kelly, this epic film that he knew was going to cost lots and lots of money, he made sure that it was always going to be Gloria who paid. There were loans, there were things that he charged to her account, and he didn't spend a penny. A cent.
Yeah, geographically accurate here.
Yeah.
And so finally, let's talk about Gloria Swanson. What point in her career is she, and what is her career like prior to Queen Kelly?
So Gloria Swanson is someone who became a film actress when she was a teenager, fashion mad, hung around the studio gates, possibly trying to get a date with Francis X. Bushman. That's part of the story. There's many legends about how she came into the business, but she was a teenager and she immediately gets thrown into the thick of making films at S&A, then briefly at Keystone, which means she's making slapstick comedies. I mean, she's not liking that. She always knew she wanted to make drama. By the time she gets to Famous Players Lasky, she's already like one husband down because marrying Wallace Beery is never a good idea. She begins to make these films that are very suitable for her fashionable, sexy image. She's a woman who can do comedy and can do drama, and she makes these marital comedies. They're kind of like sex comedies. They're called things like Why Change Your Wife and Male and Female. She makes them with Cecil B. DeMille. So the fashions, the decor, everything's exceptional. And she becomes hugely famous, a massive star, possibly not necessarily taken that seriously, because she's clearly the pretty face in the raunchy films. But she's making films that even then are kind of nudging at the boundaries of what the censors in all the different states will allow and what the nascent Hayes office will endorse. So she's slightly dangerous, a little bit silly, and she's incredibly extravagant. When it gets to 1925, she turns down $1 million from Paramount to go to United Artists and make her own films. And after a kind of hiccup with her first movie, she makes something truly special. She makes Sadie Thompson, which is this adaptation of the Somerset Maugham story Rain, which is clearly something that censors wouldn't allow because it's the film about the sex worker and the missionary and their one long dark night of the soul, as it were. And she pulls it off with the great director Raoul Walsh and with a fantastic performance from herself. And it's this point when she has the fame and the creative audacity and the ability to stand up to the studio system and fight for something that the censors won't allow, that she's about to make Queen Kelly. That's when she meets Joseph P. Kennedy. She's worried about her money, but she's not worried about who Gloria Swanson is and what kind of film she wants to make.
I remember Rain was remade as well by, what was the name of the actress who made a famous
There's
but not
two more versions. Joan Crawford.
Joan
with
Crawford.
Lewis,
Yeah, I was thinking
with
of
Lewis
her.
Milestone.
That's
Really
right.
good.
Yeah,
Really
excellent. Her introduction in that film is one of the funniest, and sort of, she sort of puts a hand on a hand and then a leg in a leg and appears in a doorway to everybody. Yeah, I think that's my favorite Joan Crawford film.
You know what, I can see that, but I have to say you've got to watch. You've got to watch the Gloria Swanson version because apart from the fact that there's a reel missing or a section missing towards the end, it's phenomenal. It's so good. It's one of Raoul Walsh's last acting roles, I think, because it's before he lost his eye, and it's a really, really good film. And the Joan Crawford version and the Gloria Swanson version are great, and the Rita Hayworth version, much as I love her, can't really hold a candle to either of them. But yeah, this is a film that, all the studio heads sent a letter to the Hayes office trying to stop Gloria Swanson from making this movie. She literally defied the industry to do it. And that's the kind of, brass neck that she had. And she would put herself out on a limb in that way. The next film she made, you would be sure, is about to be brilliant.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I always often think when I'm looking through biographies of filmmakers and actors and actresses and everything, that the disaster that comes is often they're killed by their victories, because it's that moment of hubris, that moment of, well, it worked last time.
Yeah, with making Queen Kelly, in a way, she's trying to make another Sadie Thompson. The weird thing is that Joseph P. Kennedy, even before he's seen it, has no faith in Sadie Thompson. He doesn't think it's going to be good. He doesn't think it's going to be a hit. He's not interested in it at all. He's not really interested in seeing this woman he loves playing a sex worker, I think, which is a problem when it comes to Make Queen Kelly, obviously. But so he doesn't really understand what's so great about Gloria Swanson on screen. Obviously, he understands what's so great about her in person. Believe me, he's got that covered. Erich von Stroheim, he sees it. He sees that the woman who made Sadie Thompson is someone he can work with. And he has an understanding that they could make one of his films, together. I think it's possible that for quite a lot of time on the shoot, Swanson and Stroheim were actually in cahoots over trying to get things on screen that had never been seen on screen before, things that the censors would hate. There are a few sort of choice incidents that Gloria Swanson later said she had nothing to do with.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Ellie's Eden, part of Azure Standard, was created for people who care about being thoughtful with what they buy, what they eat, and where it comes from. Growing even a small garden is a simple way to live that out. With healthy plant starts grown in Oregon from trusted non-GMO seeds, along with quality garden essentials, Ellie's Eden makes it easier to begin. Gardening helps you slow down, choose carefully, and stay connected to real food and the land. Learn more about Ellie's Eden at azurestandards.com.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
I was horrified by, but there is reason to suspect that she and von Stroheim were very much on the same page when it came to, underwear and things.
Okay, so when did it start to go wrong?
Well, I think that's interesting. When did it start to go wrong? It started going wrong when Gloria hooked up with Joe because he said, "Oh, let me sort out your finances. We'll make a great hit together. You're going to be rich." And what he did was he just took control of everything and he organized everything so that he could run her company for her. And at that point, she loses financial control of what she's doing. She doesn't really realize that. How did it go wrong with Queen Kelly? Well, I think that these three people are never going to agree on what that film would be. When you get into the shoot is when you get all the kind of classic kind of devil's candy type stuff in this book, which is, von Stroheim is taking take after take, adding scene after scene to the script, working everyone through the night. He's shooting things that are quite outrageous, that are causing a lot of consternation on set. Joseph P. Kennedy isn't really there because he's running his other businesses, and there's no one. There are people who are employed to manage von Stroheim, but he needs heavy management, and instead he's got these two men who aren't really interested, and Gloria Swanson, who's quite busy, starring in the film. So once you're actually shooting the film, you get into the more kind of familiar film chaos, where it seems like there's a producer, a star, and a director all trying to make different films. Because even if I do sort of follow my suspicion that Swanson and Stroheim were kind of, on the same page about some of the sexual excesses they wanted to put in Queen Kelly, clearly at some point it was too far for her. Clearly at some point she was no longer on the same page with him, and she was just generally worn out by the effort of in somehow trying to manage a film shoot, and not just a film shoot but an Erich von Stroheim film shoot.
Is there no point at which, because as I'm reading your book, I'm sort of thinking I know how to count pages. Is there no point at which somebody is looking at that script and that scenes, and even Stroheim himself thinking, he must know that if I make this, I don't know, as a two-parter, it would make more sense. Or if I make one film which tells this story, I can maybe make the second half as a follow-up to it. You know what I mean? Or is that misunderstanding the grandiose ambitions of the man and the capacity for self-delusion?
I think you're right, but also, I think you're misunderstanding the self-delusion of the man. I think Erich von Stroheim always thought, I'm here on set, the cameras are here, let's start shooting what I want to shoot. Later, I'll say, like with the Wedding March, let's make it into a two-part film, or, we'll see how we go later. He just gets distracted and thrilled and excited by his ideas and what he wants to show. Yes, people should have been counting pages. Some of Kennedy's men start looking at it, and at one point one of them asks for a print of the Merry Widow so he can count how many shots there are on that and compare it to how many shots they're meant to be shooting. Meanwhile, Erich von Stroheim is both adding scenes every day, but also having periodically these conversations with the producers where they say, you're not going to be able to do this, you're going to have to cut this, you're going to have to cut that. He says everything is a milestone, everything is an important moment on film, everything has a place. Gloria Swanson clearly doesn't want to have that page counting role, but even she at one point starts adding them up and it's like, this is going to take weeks and weeks and it's going to last for 5 hours on screen. This can't happen, So all the time there are people trying to have meetings with Erich von Stroheim and tell him, you've got to cut this down. Also, there are other screenwriters working on the sound version. You've got people working on a parallel screenplay, working on the ending, like completely separately to what Erich von Stroheim thinks he's achieving. And the people that are trying to manage it are people who work for Joe Kennedy in other capacities. So everybody is doing 3 or 4 jobs at once. Things are being done by multiple people. No one really has that oversight that I think you need on any film production, but particularly a film production directed by the guy that everyone in Hollywood says, you've got to manage him. He has to be managed. He has to be curbed. And no one ever seems to have been able to do that, You're
talking about getting into trouble with the censors in terms of the sex and everything, but also you point out in the book that there's a racial element to the controversy that the film is bound to stir up.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that really hasn't been written about much in relation to Queen Kelly, if at all, really. People talk about the fact that it has the African setting. People do talk about that. But at one point, Erich von Stroheim wants all these black actors, and he's putting out a casting call. He's asking for a huge black cast for this film. People did notice that he was making a film that was going to cast lots of black actors. And he said, well, of course, that's reasonable and accurate because we're going to be shooting in a setting where it's, it's going to be in the studio, but it's going to be pretending to be Germany, East Africa. What really, really winds people up is, I think, at one point that there is a suggestion that there is a character who's married to a white man, a black woman who's married to a white man, but in particular, there is a priest. And you or I might think it's quite shocking to see a priest giving the last rites to a woman in a brothel and then forcibly marrying her teenage niece in that same bed. But what really shocked people was that the priest was black. And various people sort of talk about this. Herman G. Weinberg, who was a big Erich von Stroheim devotee, the critic, says that Joseph P. Kennedy and Erich von Stroheim had a stand-up row over this, where Erich von Stroheim said, well, I would give confession to a black priest, which is interesting because we're not entirely sure whether he was really a practicing Catholic. But there's a news story in Variety, that esteemed organ, that says something about Kennedy dropping the film because of the racial trend. It's racial trend. And a few months later, the black press, sort of the African American Associated Press wire story, pick up this idea and they say the word around town is that Queen Kelly was canned because of the black priest. And what does William Hayes, who's a Republican Protestant, know about anything? Some people reckon Jesus was a black man. And there's a reason, I think, at some point, regardless of whatever else is happening on set, whatever Gloria Swanson thinks, that Joseph P. Kennedy says, I, as a man who wants to be a prominent Catholic layman in this country, cannot be associated with this film. And it's because of the treatment of religion in the film, but it's also because of this idea of a black priest, which it's hard to imagine now, but it horrified everybody who saw it.
It's fascinating as well that you point out a sort of counterfactual thing. We might say, oh, it's such a pity this film didn't get made, and it's such a pity that we don't have, it wasn't released, and it could have added to the reputations. We could have 10 or 15 more Erich von Stroheim films, or we could have 10 or 15 more Gloria Swanson films, even more, 20, 30. But if it had been released, you point out that we probably wouldn't have had JFK, and we probably wouldn't have had Robert Kennedy or Edward Kennedy or the political legacy the Kennedys have left. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that would be necessarily a good or bad thing, but it is an interesting sort of prospect, but precisely because if his name was on a film which was this controversial, that would be his sort of political legacy would be that, rather than anything he could get voted for.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that, so that's not necessarily my point, but it's a point that a columnist made in the 60s, who said, if this had been released, what would it have done for Joseph P. Kennedy couldn't pass himself off as this prominent moral figure, a diplomat and so on. And so he wouldn't have been ambassador to the UK, and he wouldn't have, his children wouldn't have gone into politics and things like that, which is possible. What's really interesting is that you sort of think, well, if he didn't want to be associated with it, he could have just taken his name off it. If he didn't want to be associated with it and he wasn't paying for it, he really didn't have to have his name on it. But clearly that wasn't an option that he considered. He just thought, this is a film that I cannot be associated with. And I mean, that's basically what Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy says in her memoir too. Like, it's almost the closest to the truth we get. He could not have this film get out there. When Gloria Swanson does try to release it, you'll see that his name is nowhere on it. And that's because at that point she's realised what he's done to her.
And so when the plug is finally pulled, there are, it's not so final because there are attempts by Gloria Swanson mostly to continue and to salvage what they already have. How long does that go on for?
I mean, how long it got? Until the 60s. So
wow.
She spends a lot of the 30s, so her career sort of slowly winds down. When she makes Sunset Boulevard and they have Queen Kelly in it, she looks at it and she thinks, we could do something with this. And so she does for quite a while. She and Joseph von Sternberg have an idea to remodel, to remake, to reboot Queen Kelly, shoot some more scenes and make it into a modern film of the 50s and 60s with Gloria Swanson looking back on her, Gloria Swanson's character, that is, looking back on her youth. And it takes a while for them to realise that's not going to happen either. And still she sort of is doing more, because when she hears that the African scenes, which she hasn't had, are around, they've showed them in London, she says, if you please, the NFT, if you please. She wants to start showing that as well. She doesn't stop talking about Queen Kelly until the day she dies, because it's all there in her memoir, which she publishes and tours extensively just before she dies. And there's even a chapter in her memoir that the publisher refused to print, which was all about Joseph Kennedy, and we'll never know what was in that. So yeah, I mean, she didn't really stop.
Okay, but so what exists now? So some footage exists but is there anything extant that is a sort of edited together, that we could see on YouTube or something?
Not on YouTube, John, but a beautiful new reconstruction by Milestone Film and Video. So in the early 80s, Dennis Doros, who was working at Kino at the time, put together this reconstruction of Queen Kelly, which somehow linked between the European sequence, which is almost entirely intact and beautiful and makes perfect sense, and then some of the African scenes, which also have been saved separately, bridges them together and puts together an ending. And that's quite good, but he's actually gone back and done it again, but with better nitrate sources, a few more shots that, were in different archives, and got a new score for it. And it's really quite phenomenal. I mean, it lasts about an hour and 45 minutes. It debuted at Venice Film Festival last year and has played a few festivals since. And depending on, when this podcast comes out, it's playing this weekend at the Denver Silent Film Festival. It's going to open the San Francisco Silent Film Festival in May with a live orchestra. And that will be coming to Blu-ray from Kino Lorber in June. So you can see this version of the film. And in my opinion, you've got, as I say, the extant European sequence, the first half or so of the film. It would have been less, but, at this point it feels more like half. And you've got a few of the scenes that were shot in the African setting. I think there are some things that were shot, which I go into detail in the book, that have been destroyed because they were pretty shocking. So, but you've got quite a lot of this sort of deathbed marriage sequence and so on. You have the controversial black priest, and this reconstruction is really clever. It does sort of bring you to an ending, and there's a reason why it works quite well. It's not a famous line because the film was never finished or released, but what would have probably become quite a famous last line of the film, it does get us all the way to Gloria Swanson's last line, and you will sort of see something of the journey of Queen Kelly.
Of course, I was only saying YouTube to set you up for that wonderful promotional.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted for you to do that.
Yeah, and we won't mention it, so it'll seem really slick. But,
well, if we're talking about things we don't mention, I can send you the Vimeo link.
We mentioned Sunset Boulevard, which of course is Gloria Swanson's swan song, if you like, and has this. In some ways, it always feels a little bit like it has cemented the idea that, Kevin Brownlow in The Parade's Gone By recounts that the silent movie era seems to be somewhat frozen in aspic and seems somewhat tragic, and it's all these sort of things. And then you kind of think, well, she's not that old. It's not, it's like
she's 50 when she makes that film, and she looks a very young 50.
Exactly. I mean, I'm 53, and I don't feel I should be sort of. I don't know. It's like Miss Havisham sitting in with the mice running over the wedding cake. I don't feel like I've been, I just need to live in the past all the time. So, but it's done that to some degree with cinema as well. I mean, I think, Billy Wilder's very talented. It's a wonderful film, etc. But there is an element, I feel it's a little bit unfair to silent movies, even as it to that era, even as it sort of promotes it. It promotes it as kind of, redundant and crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Sunset Boulevard, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. It's one of my favourite films of all time. It lives in my head constantly. And it's clever what they do there, because I love that idea. The silent film world is redundant and crazy. There is an element of that. And yet also it says that the current Hollywood system is empty and cruel. And, there's the character who's had her nose broken, and then they told her they didn't even want her to make films anyway. We see the empty sets and the joyless writers' rooms and so on. So what is clever, in my opinion, about Sunset Boulevard and what it tells us about Gloria Swanson is, Norma Desmond, the name of her character, does look a lot like Gloria Swanson. She has all of her publicity stills. She has so many aspects of her character that are related to Gloria Swanson's own filmography. The Charlie Chaplin impersonation that she does, she repeats from a silent film she did, the cars, the clothes, lots of these things. But crucially, Gloria Swanson was never like Norma Desmond because she was always moving with the times. She was always quite modern. Most important of all, she was never, ever in anything but her right mind. This was a woman who always knew exactly what was going on. And she was never, how can I put this delicately? She was never alone. She was never without companionship, shall I say? So this paints a picture that is so believable of this faded silent film star trapped in this lost world, and yet really all the things that are really sad about Norma Desmond are fake, and all the things that make her quite seductive and exciting, the way that she looks so young, she's so full of weird ideas, they're the things that are really true about Gloria Swanson. Gloria Swanson was really brave to make that film, and you know, she really didn't have many other offers from Hollywood, let's face it, but she gives her best performance probably of all time in that film. And she was never, although she made some very questionable choices film-wise after that, she was never going to disavow the film, much as she had to keep telling people she wasn't really Norma Desmond. I think that Sunset Boulevard, if it was a less good film, would read as an attack on the silent era. But because it's so good, you really, there's a part of you, it's a bit like the horror film where you want to walk into the dark house, you know? It very much is exactly that. It's like, this is scary and weird and strange. Let's take another look.
So in that sense, it's kind of almost, it's an encouragement to let's find out what drove these guys crazy.
I mean, I definitely was one of my main sort of gateway drugs into silent cinema, you know. I was already that way, but I think watching Sunset Boulevard, I was like, yeah, I need to know everything about this woman and all these people that are playing bridge and who is this? You know, I remember watching that little clip of Queen Kelly and knowing that that was this lost, unfinished film that she'd made with Erich von Stroheim, that clip that's in the film, and thinking, that somehow, that image seems so strange to me. What kind of film were they making? I remember thinking that, what kind of film were they making? Didn't realise that, you know, 25 years later I'd be writing a book about it. But I do remember thinking, what on earth can that have been?
I'm going to write a book about it, you thought, 25 years ago. And I'm going to go on a podcast, whatever they are, whatever they will be in the future. Yeah, I mean, it was my introduction to the concept. I didn't know at the time. I remember talking to you about this a few years ago. And yeah, I mean, I tell you the truth, I think my gateway drug to silent cinema, apart from Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, which I think is a lot of where people begin, maybe Harold Lloyd as well when I was a kid, has really been through reading your books. And from your books on to Kevin Brownlow and other people and Poddenoney Film Festival, that I attended with your encouragement. And so I really should thank you, because that's a whole, I mean, it's a foundation of all cinema. That can't be ignored if you are in any way serious about film.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, but no one should need a gateway drug into silent cinema if you were interested in film, because there it is. It's the first 2 or 3 chapters of the textbook. You know, it's always there. It's always there. So and so started out making westerns in the 1920s, I'll say. But so often it's talked about in this way that it's like, it's important because this director went on to do interesting things. It's important because that's how the studio was founded, or something like that. It's important because of what came later, or it's just, there's 3 or 4 masterpieces that you must know. And I think that when you talk about this idea of like a gateway drug, like seeing something like Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard and thinking, I need to know more about her. Or for me, the film that really made me think, wow, I have to watch more silent movies when I was a teenager was El Mauvais, Olivier Assayas, with Maggie Chung playing Musadora. Like, absolutely, because that's the kind of thing that brings it to life. That means it's not, do you know the names of these 10 directors, and the fact that, you know, Cecil B. DeMille started out in the silent era, did you know? Or John Ford, or whoever it might be. It's seeing an image and thinking, I haven't seen an image like that before. And I don't really know how they made that, or how they showed that, or who thought what about that, and what kind of music, and what kind of audience, and what kind of star was she? How famous was Musadora? I've never heard of her. I'm a 17-year-old in West London. Why would I? But, and I think that's the kind of thing, like, you have to just sometimes get struck by an image, like the little snippet of Queen Kelly in Sunset Boulevard. And that's what's going to make you actually want to explore that world.
Yeah, it's got to propel you into a different universe and a different understanding of what film can be. And I totally agree. I mean, I remember watching Sherlock Jr. and just thinking, you shouldn't even be allowed to make a comedy or an action film unless you see this film several times. And I tell you the truth, I think there are directors like George Miller who have obviously seen and studied Keaton, Jackie Chan, etc. I can't believe for a second they haven't, because that's it seems so influential to their own work. Pamela, what book recommendation could you give our listeners, please?
Well, I thought, so does it have to be a new book?
No, not at all.
No. Okay. So I think I really want to recommend a real classic that's probably been recommended on your podcast so many times, which is The Devil's Candy by Julie Salomon, because this is the book that I would have written if I had a time machine and I had been there at the time. The Devil's Candy is a book where she was embedded as a reporter with Brian De Palma making The Bonfire of the Vanities. So you see in real time in this book every single wrong decision they make that makes that film into a disaster. Every single casting decision, script decision, choice of spending too much money on one shot, too much time on the cameras, not enough on the actors, whatever it is, everything that happens, it happens in real time. And because she's interviewing people all the time and talking to them, you get this full 360 sense of what's happening. And one of the things I really remember is something is sort of Brian De Palma's interaction with his friends, people like Steven Spielberg, while this is going on, and that understanding of where failure and success mark you out in Hollywood, and the idea that so many people in that film are sort of riding high on a success, whether it's Morgan Freeman or Tom Hanks, or desperate for one, and when they see that this is going wrong, there's a real profound sense of sadness. And that was something that I kept thinking about again and again when I was working on The Curse of Queen Kelly. How did it feel to be doing this? How did it feel to be at this point realizing that you might have thrown away your chance of stardom if you're Walter Byron? You might have signed yourself up for a film shoot that was only going to be paying like Sina Owen, or you might be destroying all the credibility you've worked in the industry for, like Gloria Swanson. Like, what did it mean to be stuck on a cursed film? And I don't think they use the word curse in that book, but some people would say it was appropriate.
No, I totally agree. And Julia Salomon was a guest on the podcast about a year and a half ago, 2 years. So anybody who has the opportunity of reading that book, they can go back and listen to the podcast episode, which is still available, as are all of the 270 odd, 281 podcasts that are available wherever you get great podcasts, and this one.
and this one. All those great podcasts, and then this one with Pam.
No, I meant all great podcasts and then this one, Writers on Film, not this one with Pam. I
don't know why I felt the need to be cheeky.
I was being more generally self-deprecating, not it wasn't you deprecating, I was me deprecating.
It's a shame we've done this cursed podcast, John. The recording's probably gonna fail. Did I tell you that I lost the last chapter of my manuscript? So my cat sat on my keyboard, lost it, couldn't
no,
save it at all. And that is what happens when you juggle with curses, my friend.
Oh my god. Well, this recording has had some internet backs and forths with unstable connection, and some freezing on the video, which has caused us to turn off our cameras. So if the last 20 minutes we sound like we're disassociated, it will be because of that lack of eye contact that is so profound and profoundly important to podcasting.
I've been doing the FT crossword this whole time.
Oh god damn it. That's why you keep saying one across, 7 down. Five-letter word beginning with M, ending
it's always
in
a common
N.
houseplant. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Patricia. God Damn it. Thank you so much, Pamela. As ever, I can't wait for whatever your next book is so you can come back on the podcast.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
It's off!
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure as always.
You live with intention, what you allow into your body and what you don't. Like you, Azure was well built on a higher standard. Truthful, transparent labels, every ingredient listed. No proprietary blends. Organic isn't our finish line. We go further with rigorous third-party testing beyond industry standards to verify purity and potency. Living deliberately means choosing products that align with your values. Azure Well, wellness without compromise. Visit azurelivingwell.com. These products have not been evaluated by the FDA and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.